Sometimes you don't realize you're the one who created the expectation. This is marriage wisdom for wives who want a long marriage, and I am Donna.
And that's not something people talk about enough. Not the beginning of it, not how it really starts. Because when people talk about pressure in a relationship, they usually talk about it like it showed up all at once, like something went wrong, like something broke. But a lot of times, that's not how it happens. A lot of times, it starts from something good, something real, something that came from love. Because in the beginning, you're not trying to create pressure. You're not trying to create a system. You're not trying to build a routine that you'll have to maintain forever. You're not thinking that far ahead. You're just doing something because you love, because you care, because it feels right in the moment, because you want to show up, because you want to make life easier for the person you're with, because you want to contribute, because it feels natural to give. And when something feels natural, you don't question it. You don't pause and say, is this something I'm going to be able to keep doing long term? You don't stop and think, is this something that's going to turn into an expectation later? You just do it freely, willingly, without pressure, without weight. And that's why it feels good in the beginning. That's why it feels right, because it's coming from a place of choice, not obligation, not responsibility. Choice. And choice feels light. Choice feels free. Choice feels like something you're giving, not something you are carrying. And most of the time, it starts small, something simple, something that doesn't feel like it matters that much, something that doesn't feel like it's going to turn into something bigger. Maybe it's cooking. Maybe it's handling certain responsibilities. Maybe it's always being the one who remembers things. Maybe it's always being the one who steps in. Maybe it's always being the one who keeps things moving. And in the beginning, it feels fine. It feels manageable. It feels like something you don't mind doing because it's small, because it's easy, because it doesn't feel like a burden. So you do it again, and then again, and then again, and then again. And over time, that small thing stopped being small, not because the action changed, but because the repetition changed it. Because repetition builds patterns, and patterns build expectations, even when nobody says anything. even when nobody asked for it, even when nobody intended for it to happen. It just forms quietly through consistencies, through repetition, through what keeps happening. And that's the part people don't always recognize because nobody sat down and said, "This is now your role. This is now your responsibility. This is something you have to do." That's not how it was introduced. It was introduced as love. It was introduced as care. It was introduced as something you chose. But over time, the choice becomes part of the relationship. It becomes the rhythm. It becomes how things are done. And once something becomes the rhythm, it becomes expected. Not because someone demanded it, but because it's always been there. And when something is always there, people adjust to it. They get used to it. They build around it. They rely on it. And that's where things start to feel different. Because now it's no longer something you're choosing. It starts to feel like something you have to keep up. And that shift right there, that's where the weight begins. Because there's a difference between choosing something and maintaining something. There's a difference between giving something and feeling responsible for it. There's a difference between love and obligation. And when something moves from love to obligation, even if the action stays the same, the feeling changes. And let me slow down for a second, because this is where most people miss it. Sometimes we don't realize we're creating a pattern. We think we're just helping. We think we're just doing what needs to be done. We think we're just being supportive. We think we're just showing up. And all of that may be true, but patterns don't announce themselves. They don't show up with a label. They don't say, "This is going to become your responsibility later." They build quietly. They form through what keeps happening. And by the time you notice it, it already feels normal. It already feels like this is just how things are. And that's where people get stuck. Because now you're not questioning it. You're just carrying it. And the longer you carry something, the more it becomes part of your identity in the relationship. It becomes what people expect from you. It becomes what people rely on from you. It becomes what people assume you'll do. And assumptions carry weight because now, if you don't do it, it's noticeable. Now, if you don't show up the same way, it creates a shift. Now, if you don't keep it going, it feels like something is missing. And that's where pressure builds. Not because someone is trying to pressure you, but because the pattern created it. And now you're not just doing something out of love. You're doing it to maintain what's been created, to keep things smooth. to keep things running, to avoid questions, to avoid tensions, to avoid the feeling of what happened. And that's a different kind of energy, because now you're not just giving, you're sustaining. And sustaining something long term requires energy. It requires capacity. It requires something that has to be replenished. And if it is not balanced, it starts to feel heavy. And that's the emotional truth of it. Because now, what used to feel light feels heavier than it should. What used to feel easy feels like something you have to push through. What used to feel like love starts to feel like effort. And effort without balance always turns into weight. And that's where things start changing inside you, not on the outside. You may still be doing the same thing, still showing up, still carrying it, still handling it, but inside, you feel the difference. You feel the weight. You feel the shift. And a lot of women don't say anything at that point. Not because they don't feel it, but because they don't want it to turn into a problem. They don't want to make something out of nothing. They don't want to disrupt the peace. They don't want to seem ungrateful. So they keep going. They keep carrying it. They keep showing up. But inside, they're feeling it. And that feeling, if it's not recognized, if it's not addressed, it doesn't stay neutral. It grows quietly over time. Not everything you start out of love is meant to become a permanent expectation. Let that sit for a moment, because that right there is where understanding begins. Some things were meant for a season. Some things were meant as an expression. Some things were meant as a moment of care, not a lifelong assignment. And if you don't recognize that early, it can slowly turn into something that feels heavy. And that's where pressure begins. Not loud, not dramatic, but steady. And eventually, that's where resentment can grow. Not because love disappeared, but because something that started as love was never adjusted as it became something else. And that right there is something you want to pay attention to early, because long marriages are not built on doing everything forever the same way it started. They are built on awareness, on communication, on being able to say, this started from love, but it doesn't feel the same anymore. They are built on adjustment, on recognizing when something needs to shift before it becomes something you feel every day. Because when something is recognized early, it can be corrected. When something is understood, it can be balanced. When something is spoken, it can be changed. And that is how long marriages are built.